Hey there, hello, Sindre here. One of the most frequent questions I get in my capacity as a lecturer and course coordinator is how do I grade the exam? So let's just talk about that. The way I grade the exam depends essentially on the question type. So the way you grade it is going to vary from question type to question type. I have this audio video, this one, that kind of I show you all of the different question types that is available in the digital platform that we are using at my university. Inspera Assessment is called, so you can take a look at that. But one aspect that I neglected to talk about there is like how do I grade. So just to recap the previous video, the question types available in Inspera comes in two major categories. You have questions that are manually marked, and you have questions that are automatically marked by the computer, by the software. So how does the grading work? Well, when it comes to the manually marked questions, that is marked by a human. Me, for instance. Usually me. Pretty much always me. No one else but me. And it is kind of, you're not supposed to say this, but when it comes to manually marked questions, that could be like essay questions, it is extensively based on, on a subjective assessment by whoever is examining or grading the candidate. So it's not uncommon to hear stories about the student getting, for instance, a D on an exam, then they complain, and then somehow with like a different examiners they get an A, or a student getting a B complains and then suddenly gets an F. Like this happens, quite often. So there is extensively a lot of subjective assessments going on here. But the grading of manually marked questions is essentially based on the graders or the examiners' expertise or expert judgment. So you can agree and disagree here. So when I do have an external examiner that I'm grading together with, like most of the time we end up with the same grade. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but usually 7 or 8 times out of 10 we arrive at the same grade. But I think on average we maybe have like a 10 to 15% difference in the scores. Quite often it doesn't really amount to anything, but sometimes you get like borderline cases. So there's not much to be said about that, but I think it's more interesting here is to talk about the automatically marked questions, and that is usually what the students are most wondering about there. So for instance, a follow-up question usually is there a penalty when you answer incorrectly on these automatically marked questions? And that kind of depends again on the question type. Now there are many different automatic marking questions, but I think we can disaggregate them into two categories. In one category, there's only possible to give one answer. So all answers that you can give are mutually exclusive. If you give one answer, you cannot give another answer. And the other category here would be questions where you can answer several, where you can provide several different answers. So an example of the former would be a multiple choice question where you have a set of predefined alternatives and you can only select one alternative. So for instance, if you first select alternative A, it's not possible to select alternative B without deselecting alternative A. So that would be the former. In the latter, you could have a set of predefined alternatives where it's possible to click on every single alternative. So this is the major difference. You have questions where you have mutually exclusive answers and questions where they're not mutually exclusive, where you can select as many as you want. So long story short, I grade these two different types differently. When the alternatives or the answers you can give are mutually exclusive, then there's a very simple rule. If you give the correct answer, you get the full score on that question. If the question is worth 10 points, for instance, you either get 10 points or you get 0 points. In my exam design, there is never any penalty to question types where the alternatives are mutually exclusive, either full score or 0 score. But when it comes to question types, automatic marking question types, where you have where alternatives are not mutually exclusive, when you can choose as many as you want, then there is a penalty. And the reason for that is pretty simple. If there was no penalty for incorrect alternatives, you could just click on every single alternative and just get a full score no matter what. Because if you click on every single alternative, then you're guaranteed to check off all of the correct alternatives, and the incorrect ones, if they don't give a penalty, well, then you get a full score no matter what. So that's a very easy way to game the system, and this is why I feel there has to be a penalty when it comes to this sort of question types. I say question types actually should be singular, because in in-spec assessment there is only one question type where it is possible to give more than one answer, and that's called multiple response question. And let's talk about how that is graded, because this is essentially what most of the questions when it comes to exam grading is about. So the way it works is that I decide exogenously on how much the question is worth. I could, for instance, say that the whole question is worth 10 points. Then I need to decide on how many correct alternatives there are. So for instance, if there are, it could be, let's say there are 6 alternatives, then there could be 1 correct alternative, 2 correct alternatives, 3, 4, 5, or 6 correct alternatives. But let's say there are 3 alternatives that are correct. What score do I give to each of them? I follow this approach. I take the max score for that question, in our example 10, and I divide it by the number of correct alternatives. Not the total number of alternatives, which would be 6 in this example, but the number of correct alternatives, which in this example is 3. So 10 divided by 3, that's 3.333333 ad infinitum. Now, in-spec does not allow for having more than 2 decimals of precision when it comes to giving points. And also, I'll get back to that. So what to do? 10 divided by 3, 3.33. Then I take this number and I multiply it by 100. So now it becomes 333.3333. Then I apply the ceiling function, which means that you round upwards to nearest integer. So 333.33, that becomes 334. And then no decimals. Then I divide by 100 again, so that it becomes 3.34. And that is the award you get for every single correct alternative that you select. So basically, with the 3 alternatives, 3 correct alternatives, if you select one of the correct alternatives, you get 3.34 points, yes, assuming you don't select any of the incorrect alternatives. And if you select 2 correct alternatives and none of the incorrect alternatives, then you get 3.34 multiplied by 2, which is 6.68 points. But what happens if you select all 3 correct alternatives and none of the incorrect ones? Do you then get the 10.02? No, you get capped there. Then you only get 10 points. So you're missing out on the .02. So it's a cap there. But what happens if you select an incorrect alternative? Well, then I give a penalty, which is equal to the reward you get for selecting a correct alternative. So you get a plus 3.34 for a correct alternative, and then you lose 3.34 for incorrect alternative. So if you select 1 correct and 1 incorrect, then they cancel out and become 0. If you select 2 correct and 2 incorrect, then they cancel out and become 0. If you select 2 correct alternatives, then you get 6.68. But if you also select an incorrect alternative, then you lose 3.34 and you're back to 3.34. But what happens if your whole score becomes negative, if you have selected more incorrect alternatives than correct alternatives? Well, here's the trick. I put a floor here of 0. So if you mess up and you're getting more incorrect alternatives than correct alternatives, I don't penalize you for the rest of the exam. I only penalize you internally within that particular question. So in that case, you get 0. So you get the highest score between either 0 or whatever you kind of scored before I kind of censor it. So that is essentially how I grade the multiple response questions. If you're curious about more of the details, you can look at this document right here, which I have written, which goes more into detail. But long story short, if the alternatives are mutually exclusive, you either get full score or 0, no penalty for incorrect. If you're dealing with a multiple response question where the alternatives are not mutually exclusive, well, then there is a penalty for incorrect alternatives, but only internally within that particular question. So you don't get penalized outside of that. So if you score less than 0, if you get a negative score, then I just put you back up to 0. So yeah, that's how I grade the multiple response. That's how I grade the exam essentially. So yeah, good luck with the exam.